Good evening to everybody who has come in here. Okay, so my topic is on OCT. Over the past 10 to 15 years, there has been the OCT has become a very important and necessary tool for this, and it has a diagnostic, a prognostic, and most importantly, it plays a very important role in follow-up of patients. So I'll be talking about on optical coherence tomography imaging for interpretation for beginners. And Mona ma'am will be my moderator for the session. So, optical coherence tomography is nothing but optical, that is use of light. Coherence is when two light beams same wavelength are in phase, and tomography is getting multiple sections. It is a non-contact, non-invasive diagnostic imaging which gives you high resolution and cross-sectional images. Works under the principle of low coherence interferometry using Michelson's interferometer. So, Carmen Puliofito was the first to actually given the inputs regarding the OCT device in 1995. And over the years, there has been development of the software. So, on through time domain OCT, spectral domain OCT, and to step source OCT. So now an OCT machine or the device, it consists of a light source. It has a beam splitter. So the light that falls on a light source, it splits the light into two beams. One is a reference beam, which is directed to the reference mirror, and a sample beam, which is directed into the eye. So the basic principle that it uses is Michelson's interferometer, where over here what you see is a light source and a beam splitter, where the light actually falls on two separate mirrors, where these two mirrors are actually equidistant from each other. But by moving one mirror, the reflected rays of light that comes from these mirrors, they possess a phase. And this phase difference is what produces an interference pattern which is detected by the detector. So in a time domain OCT, the reference mirror is a moving mirror, and therefore the reflected rays from the reference mirror and the reflected rays from the layers of the retina, it undergoes a phase difference, and then the detector, it detects the interference pattern. And by doing so, the reference over time is used to actually, you get the generate an A scan at a single point. And by moving sample and the light source with respect to each other, we are able to generate, sorry? Okay. By moving them with respect to each other, it generates multiple A scans, and combining these A scans, we can form a cross-sectional linear image, which is the B scan. Now, how are these systems different from each other? So in a time domain OCT, the moving arm is the reference mirror, and it consists of a single photo detector. And therefore, the imaging or the speed with which these images are acquired from time domain OCT, it is determined by how fast the moving mirror moves. So because the relative slow speed of the moving mirror, we are able to acquire a limited number of A scans per second, which is around 400 A scans per second. Now, in order to improve the sensitivity and the imaging speed in a spectral domain OCT, instead of a moving mirror, the reference arm is actually a static mirror. And instead of a single detector, we have an array of photo detectors. So here the speed of acquisition or the speed by which the images are acquired is determined by how fast the linear detector array is, and which are higher than 10 or thousands of A scans per second. So you're able to acquire around 27 to 70,000 A scans per second. So because of faster acquisition and scanning speed, we're able to minimize changes due to eye movements and acquire higher sampling density of the macula. And by doing so, we are able to avoid missing out small pathologies which are present. Now, spectral domain and swept source OCT. Now, in spectral domain OCT, it consists of a spectrometer, and the spectrometer is what actually acquires the reflected waves of light, that is from the reflected and the sample arm, and it produces an interferogram towards the linear detector array. Now, this linear detector array consists of very finite number of pixels. So because of these finite number of pixels, if there are rays of light which are having very close wavelength with each other, they fall on one particular pixel. And if this happens, that particular area, actually the resolution decreases. So in order to avoid that, that's where the development of the software has taken place. Instead of a linear detector array in a swept source OCT, there is a a fast fine tuning laser and a high speed digitizer. The tuning laser has around 1050 nanometers of light, and because of which we are able to acquire around 100,000 to 400,000 A scans per second. And because of these fast speeds of acquisition and higher acquisition and deeper penetration with these systems, the axial and the transverse resolution has also improved. Now, going on to choroidal imaging, the choroid can be imaged by both with the help of spectral domain and the swept source OCT. In a spectral domain OCT, the choroid is imaged with the help of an enhanced depth image. So this is how it's done is a zero delay line, which is actually the point of highest sensitivity. It is shifted from its conventional location, that is at the vitreoretinal interface, to a more posterior, that is towards the sclera. But even by doing so, because of high reflectivity of the retinal pigment epithelium, it is and poor penetration beyond it, the choriocapillaries and the choroidal vasculature is still not very visible. So in a swept source OCT, because of the higher wavelength of light and deeper penetration, we are able to visualize the choriocapillaries and the choroidal vasculature better. So what are the scan patterns that are available? There is a cube scan, raster, and the radial scan. These are the common scans that are used for imaging the macula. Now, a cube scan is actually rapid series. Yeah, it takes rapid series of line scan, generally around 6 into 6 millimeter square. And by default, it is centered on the fovea, but then any area of interest can be captured by moving this cube elsewhere. Then comes the radial scan. Radial scans are 6 to 12 radial scans, and these scans are of equal angles with each other, and they have high resolution images obtained. Now, raster scan a series of parallel lines. They also have a high resolution images which are obtained. Now, interpretation of an OCT printout. Now, before we look into directly the image that is obtained after scanning, there are a few parameters that has to be looked into before we report a scan. So firstly, it is a patient detail, which is on the top of the printout, which gives a name and the ID number. Along with it was the date of birth. It is important to exactly put the correct date of birth, because the measurements that comes out of these systems is according to the normative data. Age controls normative data. Then it gives you the information regarding the machine that is being used, the exam date. So this gives you an information as to when the the scan was taken. Was it a recent scan, or was it a scan which was taken very long ago, depending upon when the patient is who presents to you. Then the signal strength. The signal strength actually gives an idea of the quality of the scan. So the signal strength, this is in the Cirrus machine. The signal strength, it ranges from 0 to 10. And as you're the image, it shows you the signal over here as green and red. So anything less than 6 shows a red. So you're going to get a very poor image. And more than 6 gives you a green signal, which gives you an acceptable image. Also, you're supposed to look into the reference image that is present, how sharply focused it is it uniformly illuminated, and if there are or absence of any artifacts. Then we have to look into the protocol of the scan. So here it is a macular thickness cube of 512 to 128. Now these numbers actually it represents, that is 128 means there are 128 horizontal scan lines, and each of these scan lines compose around 512 A scans. Then look into which eye, OD or OS, which is represented like it gets highlighted. Okay. Now the reference image is the infrared image, or it could be a color fundus or an autofluorescence. Its color-coded thickness map will also be present with a color scale. Now what is important here is the type of the scan. So here the protocol, that is, this is a cube scan, the direction of the scan, the area that is scanned, and most importantly, we have to make sure that the area is included within the scan. Then the OCT image. After looking into all these parameters, we can look into grayscale image that is printed out in the OCT printout. Now measurements. The measurements are usually done from the internal limiting membrane to the retinal pigment epithelium. Now a few measurement terminologies are the center point thickness and the center subfield mean thickness. The center point thickness is the average thickness of 6 radial scans at a single point at the single section, and the subfield mean thickness is the mean value of 128 thickness values are obtained within the central subfield 1 millimeter. Now, the thickness map is in the form of an ETDRS grid, which consists of 3 circles, that is 3, 6, and 9 millimeters. And each of them are divided by 4 lines into 9 zones, and they're centered over the fovea. And the thickness maps are color-coded comparing with the normative data. So green indicates normal. Both shades of yellow, it shows that they are suspects. So a red and a pink shade shows that they are abnormal numbers. Now the follow-up scan. The recent machines, they have the ability to actually categorize the area that is scanned at the first visit. And the follow-up scan is a software that is available within the machine, that when the same patient comes at the next visit, we opt for this particular option, that is the follow-up option. The machine automatically by default, it picks up the same area that was imaged earlier and therefore gives a comparative data. So this also scan, we have to look into all the parameters, make sure that the signal strength is good. And over here, it gives you an idea of the area that is imaged. So if all the parameters are right, it shows that the registration is successful. Now, a registration failed shows that there are parameters which are not correct. That is, for example, here the signal strength in the initial visit, it shows 6/10, which is a good signal. But in the second visit, it shows a scan, the signal of 3/10, showing that it is a poor scan.
Sneha, can I interrupt at one point?
Yes, ma'am.
You have one pop-up which is blocking some of your images in the lower part.
Okay.
Sharing. Can you hide
Okay, yes, ma'am. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So now we'll start interpreting an OCT image. So initially what we'll do is we'll see what are the normal terminologies, what is the normal contour, what's the normal foveal contour, and then we go on to a layer by layer analysis, and then we look into the abnormal changes that takes place in these areas. Okay, now layers and zones and what is normal. Now retina, as we know, it consists of multiple layers, and each of these layers, they have difference in their reflectivity because of the density that is present, differences in the density in these layers. And by recording the difference in the reflectance patterns from these different layers is how we're getting the alternating hyper and hyporeflective layers. So a panel of retina specialists, they introduced a standardized nomenclature system with normal anatomical landmarks. And this is the international nomenclature for optical coherence tomography. Okay. And starting from, so one should keep in mind that you don't use the term line. Line is actually a one-dimensional structure. So we use the term layer. So layer represents actually a lamina, which describes a defined lamina. So starting from vitreous towards the choroid, now vitreous is an optically empty medium. Then the surface, the posterior hyaloid is usually not visible, but when it is detached from the surface, it's seen as a thin hyperreflective line, which is the posterior cortical vitreous. The innermost layer, which is the internal limiting membrane, which is seen as a mild hyperreflective. Then comes the nerve fiber layer, which is a hyperreflective layer. The nerve fiber layer nasally, that is towards the disc, is actually very thick because of the presence of the papillomacular bundle. And here you see as a very thick hyperreflective layer. Below the nerve fiber layer, next is the ganglion cell layer. The ganglion cell layer is seen as a hyporeflective layer. Then the two plexiform layers, the inner plexiform and the outer plexiform layer. Both these plexiform layers are hyperreflective and they have alternating nuclear layers, the inner nuclear layer and the outer nuclear layer, which are hyporeflective. Now coming on to the four outer bands, the four outer retinal bands are the hyperreflective bands. The innermost hyperreflective band is the external limiting membrane. It is a very mild hyperreflective compared to the other three and the innermost hyperreflective layer. The next hyperreflective zone is the ellipsoid zone over here. The second innermost hyperreflective is the ellipsoid zone. The zone that is seen between the external limiting membrane and the ellipsoid zone is the myoid zone. So the ellipsoid zone and the myoid zone, they represent the ellipsoid and the myoid of the inner segments of the photoreceptors. And the hyperreflectivity of the ellipsoid zone correlates with the mitochondria that is present in them. The next is the interdigitation zone. The interdigitation zone, it represents the outer segment of the photoreceptors. And the final and the last, the most hyperreflective band, which is the RPE Brooks membrane complex. Both of them are seen as a single band. Then below the RPE Brooks membrane complex are the layers of the choroid. The choroid capillary is seen as a thin hyporeflective, followed by the Sattler and the Haller layer. The Sattler are the smaller choroidal vasculature, followed by the Haller, which is the larger choroidal vasculature, and finally the choroidoscleral junction. Okay, now we go on to the abnormalities. First, hyporeflective. Now, what is hyporeflective or reduced reflectivity? So, hyporeflective means that these areas, they actually reflect light less than the surrounding and they appear black, usually seen when there is collection of fluids such as retinal edema, subretinal fluid or sub-RPE fluid. Hyperreflectivity, there is increased reflectivity. They appear as white because there is an increase in the reflectivity of these structures compared to the other structures. Examples like hard exudate, fibrosis, calcification, hemorrhages, the epiretinal membranes, vitreous membranes, or the neovascular membranes. Then comes shadowing. Shadowing is because these structures, they actually absorb amount of light and there is a decrease in the visibility of the structures which are seen beneath them, and because of which they are known as shadowing. Then reverse shadowing is when there is excessive amount of light that is transmitted to a particular area, usually seen when there is atrophy or loss of retinal pigment epithelium. Okay, so we have seen how a normal OCT image of the macula looks. So as we're describing, you see if it is normal or if there is a deviation from normal. For example, over here, when there is a posterior bowing of the ports of the eye, which is seen in high myopia, which is actually and giving a concave contour of the retinal surface. Or is there a convexity of the surface because of dome-shaped macula or other tumors which could be present? Then the foveal contour, is the foveal contour normal or is there a change in the foveal contour? Is there a traction? Is there a pull at the fovea? Or is it elevated because of the presence of any edema? Or is it an exaggeration of the foveal contour, foveal thinning? Okay, so how we're going to go about this is we're going to see what are the changes. Are there morphological changes or there are changes in the reflectivity? Now, morphological changes as in if there is thickness or if there is thinning, if there's presence of an abnormal tissue, or there's absence of an absence of a tissue, and the changes in reflectivity as in increased or decreased reflectivity, and where are they present? Are they causing changes in the vitreomacular interface, or are they causing changes in the intraretinal structures or the outer retinal bands? So here, what we see is an OCT image of the macula that is passing through the fovea, and the posterior cortical, which is usually not present, but here we can see a very thin hyperreflective membrane that is seen, that is separating from the surface of the retina, but still attached at the region of the fovea. The foveal contour is normal. The inner and the outer retinal layers are also normal. This is suggestive of a vitreomacular adhesion. And since the changes are seen in the vitreomacular interface, we can look at this particular plane for the present time. And as the separation increases, as it goes further, the posterior vitreous is seen, and the perifoveal posterior vitreous detachment is seen, and there is attachment at the region of the fovea, and this is causing changes of the foveal contour and inner retinal changes such as pseudocyst formation or cystic spaces. This is suggestive of a vitreomacular traction. And further, when there is a separation from the surface of the retina, it can lead to loss of tissue at the region of the fovea, where there is complete loss of tissue from the internal limiting membrane up to the layer of the retinal pigment epithelium, with associated internal changes such as cystoid changes, which are seen over here. This is suggestive of a full thickness macular hole. So next we'll go on to the inner retinal changes. So in this OCT image, what we see is there is an increase in the central macular thickness. It is associated with changes in the inner retinal layers. That is, there are well-defined hyporeflective cystic oval-shaped areas of decreased reflectivity. And these changes are seen because mainly due to the arrangement of the molar cells, molar fibers, as well as the orientation of the Henle's layer. And when we when we go through the layers, we see that these cystic changes are seen in the outer plexiform layer. So this is suggestive of a cystoid macular edema. And whenever we see these kind of changes in the inner retinal layers, where there is increase in the retinal thickening associated with intraretinal and subretinal or absence of subretinal fluid, we can think in terms of retinal vascular lesions like diabetic macular edema, or vascular occlusions like CRVO or BRVO, Irwin gas, or post-inflammations like uveitis. Now, are they all fluid collections that we see over here, or how are they different from what we have seen before? Now, when we look at this image over here, we see that there is a splitting within the layers of the retina, and the hyporeflective areas that we see over here are seen as vertical pillars. They're not seen as well-defined or oval-shaped areas, but they're seen as vertical pillars. And more importantly, they are seen over a larger area beyond the fovea. So this is suggestive of schisis or retinoschisis. These hyporeflective areas that you see over here are small lamellar defects of irregular borders. They have decreased reflectivity and they are seen as loss of tissue, which suggests cavitation. Okay, now we move on to a few hyperreflective changes which are seen in the inner retinal layers. So here what we see is there is increased reflectivity there is increased reflectivity of the inner retinal layers, and is seen as a uniform and a very widely spread over the entire zone as white inner white layers, and this corresponding decreased reflective. There is corresponding decreased reflectivity in the outer layers of the retina and the retinal pigment epithelial choriocapillary area. This is suggestive or it is seen in conditions of central retinal artery occlusion. And here when we see as compared to the temporal side, the nasal side towards the disc, the layers are actually seen well. The outer bands, that is the RPE and the choriocapillaries, can also be seen. This is because when we see the reference image over here, the cilioretinal artery is spared. So this area is a spared area, and there is occlusion in the temporal side. Now we go on to how these hyperreflective lesions that you see here are different from what we see before. In central retinal artery occlusion, what we saw is a hyperreflective zone that is seen towards the entire inner retinal layers. But here we see there are focal layers of hyperreflectivity that is seen as cotton wool spots. Now, cotton wool spots are actually infarcts of the nerve fiber layer. So they are seen as white superficial lesions with shadowing. Now, if you see a hyperreflective lesion, which is seen at the junction of the outer plexiform layer and outer nuclear layer, along with the loss of the ellipsoid zone, you can think in terms of AMN. And if you see a hyperreflective lesion within the junction of the inner nuclear layers, you can think in terms of PAM. Now, there are other hyperreflective focal lesions that are seen, which are well defined and they are smaller in size. These are hard exudates. Now, you should not get confused between a hard exudates and a cotton wool spot. They are seen in macular, vascular occlusions. They are seen in diabetic retinopathies. But hard exudates are seen in the outer plexiform layers. So, they are seen more towards the inner layers of the retina, while cotton wool spots, as I said earlier, are infarcts of the retinal nerve fiber layer. They are superficial and they are larger. Okay. Now, this is another image that we see. This is a normal, when we see the reference image, it's a norm. It shows that there is no particular pathological lesion. But here on the OCT scan, there are thin, oblong, tubular, hyperreflective lines that are seen with shadowing. So these are nothing but the normal blood vessels. So looking at the reference image is important because if you get a scan like this, there is no pathology. They are normal blood vessels that are seen. Now, moving on to the outer retina. So when you feel that there are changes in the outer retina, we can take the retinal pigment epithelium as a reference plane. And then you see anterior and posterior to the retinal pigment epithelium and its associated changes. So here we see an OCT image of the macula. And when you trace the retinal pigment epithelium, the retinal pigment epithelium is a hyperreflective band, that is the outermost hyperreflective band. It is smooth and it is continuous. Anterior to it, you see a well-defined dome-shaped elevation of the neurosensory retina. It is separated from the retinal pigment epithelium, and it is has a hyperreflective space within it because of collection of fluid. And posterior to it, you see that the choroid is thickened and there is dilatation of vessels. Okay, so this is a serous macular detachment. Now, you should not get confused between a serous macular detachment and a retinal pigment epithelial detachment. So again, when you trace a retinal pigment epithelium over here in this image on your right, there is an elevation and a smooth elevation of the retinal pigment epithelium. It is separated from the underlying Brooks Weber, which is seen as a very thin hyperreflective band associated with the serous macular detachment. So then this is what is a retinal pigment epithelial detachment. So posterior to the retinal pigment epithelium, the choroid is thickened. There is dilatation of vessels. So these changes are suggestive of a central serous chorioretinopathy. Now, other conditions where you have a serous macular detachment. So in this OCT image over here, you have a large serous macular detachment. There are associated skytic changes which are seen inside. Now, the reason why I have put this image is you see that the serous macular detachment is having a connection or this close connection to the optic disc. And therefore, when you see the reference image, you see that there is an optic disc pit. So the importance of clinical examination is very important over here. Otherwise, these changes can be missed. Okay. Now, other conditions where you have serous macular detachment and how are they different from what we have seen so far? So when you trace the retinal pigment epithelium, you see that the retinal pigment epithelium, it's not smooth, it is irregular and it is undulating. And the subretinal fluid, that it is not an optically empty space. It has hyperreflective septae and the fluid inside is in a loculated form. There are pockets of fluid inside with hyperreflective membrane or septae which is seen between them. There are hyperreflective foci that is seen within the layers of the retina, which could suggest of inflammatory cells. And posteriorly, you see a very thickened choroid, and because of which you can't see the choroidoscleral junction. So these are inflammatory conditions of VKH. Now here, the changes that you see are over a wide range. But instead, if you see a very focal area of an elevation where the RPE is also, it is irregular, the choroid is thickened, you should think in terms of choroidal mass lesions. Now, going on to choroidal neovascular membranes, again taking the RPE as a reference plane. When we trace the RPE over here, you see there is a mild detachment of the retinal pigment epithelium from the underlying Bruch's membrane, and there is hyperreflective lesion that is seen within the retinal pigment epithelium along with a serous macular or subretinal fluid. This is suggestive of a type 1 CNVM. Now, when you trace in this image the retinal pigment epithelium, the retinal pigment epithelium, it is continuous, associated with hyperreflective membrane that is seen above the retinal pigment epithelium, associated with inner retinal cystoid changes suggestive of type 2 CNVM. Now, if you get an image where there is hyperreflective or lesions which are seen above and below the retinal pigment epithelium with inner retinal changes, it is suggestive of a type 3 CNVM. So a type 1 CNVM is where the heterogeneous material is seen within the retinal pigment epithelium. It is commonly associated with subretinal fluid. Intraretinal fluid is seen, it is rare or seen later towards the disease. And in type 2 CNVM, the hyperreflective membrane is seen, above the retinal pigment epithelium and associated with intraretinal fluids. Presence of intraretinal fluid at baseline is an indicator of poor visual outcome. Now, I already explained as to how to detect a retinal pigment epithelial detachment. Now, depending upon the morphology of the retinal pigment epithelial detachment and the type of reflectivity that is seen within the retinal pigment epithelial detachment, there are different types. So, when there is PLM, a retinal pigment epithelial detachment with a homogeneous hyperreflective lesion within it is suggestive of a drusenoid PED. Whereas when you have a well-defined dome shape and a sharp elevation, smooth surface, along with an optically empty space within it, is suggestive of a serous pigment epithelial detachment. On the other hand, when you have a very flat and irregular margins of the pigment epithelial detachment with a heterogeneous hyperreflectivity within it, it is suggestive of a fibrovascular PED. And in a hemorrhagic PED, you have a large pigment epithelial detachment, and the superior surface is seen as hyperreflective is because of the presence of blood, and the structures beneath them are not visible because of shadowing. This is suggestive of a hemorrhagic pigment epithelial detachment. Now, there are different terminologies of pigment epithelial detachment that has been described. You have thumb-shaped pigment epithelial detachment. There are notch pigment epithelial detachment. And whereas when you have a pigment epithelial detachment over here with the presence of a hyperreflective lumen surrounded by a hyperreflective ring underneath the surface of the RPE, you can think in terms of a polyp. Now, this is to basically stress on the outer retinal bands, mainly zone and the external limiting membrane. You have to look for associated disruption or loss of the ellipsoid zone, be it diabetic retinopathy, be it vascular occlusions, conditions such as age-related macular degenerations, or even mactal, where you have loss. Over here, you have loss of the ellipsoid zone with the external limiting membrane. Here also there is loss of these layers. Why it is important is because integrity of the ellipsoid zone and the external limiting membrane, it correlates with the visual acuity. So you should always have a checklist. Do not jump into the conclusion of what could the image be. You determine first the indication for OCT or indication for imaging by doing an examination. And if the OCT image actually shows the area of interest, is the scan protocol appropriate? Then you look for the scan quality and presence or absence of any artifacts. Then you move on to the image and you see each layer by layer from posterior vitreous to the choroidoscleral junction. You classify the abnormality into the change in contour, the change in the thickness and reflectivity, or the presence or absence of any abnormal tissue. Look for the abnormality and the layer that is involved. And at the last, you can look for any presence of known biomarkers. Last but not the least, you have to correlate clinically before you make a diagnosis. So a few common artifacts are, a mirror artifact is where actually it results as an inverted image. The reasons are when the machine is actually pushed too close to the eye, or curvature of the retina in cases of high myopia or retinoschisis, where it crosses the zero line. Then there can be an artifact like this, which is known as vignetting, because of loss of signal which is seen over one side of the image. This is because the iris blocks a part of the OCT beam. Okay, misalignment, which is obvious. It is because the fovea is not centered during the volume scans. It is either because the patient is having a poor fixation or incorrect placement of the scan. Then blink artifacts. Blink artifacts are seen as black or white bars. There's lots of data responding to these areas in these images over here when the patient blinks while acquiring the image. Then motion artifacts. Motion artifacts shows a very disrupted image. There can be misalignment of the blood vessels. The fovea can be seen as duplicated. The reason is movement of the eye during acquisition. So these are the OCT machines that are available in our department. We have the Cirrus 5000, the Topcon, the Heidelberg, and the SS OCT Plexilite. These are my references. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sneha, for a nice presentation. I request others to put in their comments. I'll just make one correction in one of your slides. Can you
Yes.
go back to the pigment epithelial detachment slides, the PED ones? Yes. Yeah. Basically, the lower left, what is labeled as fibrovascular PED is actually a large drusenoid PED over a process of evolution. You have small serous components and the drusenoid material. So this is basically a long-standing drusenoid PED. Fibrovascular PED usually have lamellar structure. So when you see these areas of very low reflectivity and homogeneous reflectivity, like this kind of population, then you have to think of a long-standing drusenoid pigment epithelial detachment that will probably flatten out over a period of time. So probably now we can request everyone to give in their inputs. Very nice presentation. She has kept it brief and not gone into details of everything because it's supposed to be a basic class. A little mixture of both. I welcome everyone to give their comments and also ask her questions. She'll be answering.
Sneha, if you have any OCT images, maybe you can ask somebody to just describe the OCT image. Simple description, just to know that everybody is in understanding the basic. If you have any image which is
Yes, sir.
some OCT image that you have taken down many images. Just any image, and maybe you can just point out to one of your friends and ask them to just describe it. Because describing as you did is a very tough job. So for the sake of description, they have developed a nomenclature so that things are very precise. It is a standard definition, standard description, so that people stick to a proper description when they publish articles or when they're describing a lesion. Maybe you have something. Maybe you can just show a fibrovascular PD itself. So they can, from the vitreous to the. Dr. Girish Rao has a question on the chat box. How do you
decide which machine to advise the scan on? You showed the collection.
Yes, actually depend the main difference between initially what I've said is that the spectral domain OCT and a swept source OCT is because you can see the choroid more clearly because of its better penetration. So I assume that when it comes to diseases of the choroid with respect to the retinal pigment epithelium, I feel the swept source OCT gives better information compared to the spectral domain OCT.
Okay, let me just clarify. Basically, if the PGs are listening, not everybody will have a swept source OCT. That is one. And the second thing is, if you're looking at just scanning for pathology, then doing a regular spectral domain OCT should be fine. and use the macular cube scan, because the macular cube scan scans rapidly the entire macula. So then you will be able to pick out pathology, and based on that you can decide which is the area you want to go further. So then you choose the radial scan or the raster scan. The raster scan is the most dense, the best high resolution scan, but like you saw, it shows very small areas. So unless you know where to scan in a raster, there is no point putting a raster scan to start with. And then if you're thinking there may be something in the choroid, don't think because you don't have a swept source, it is not possible. Most of the new machines, the spectral domain OCTs, have the enhanced depth imaging mode. You can very easily go into the EDI mode and see the choroid as well. If you have a swept source, well and good. If you don't have it, it's still possible. Some other questions, I think, for you on the chat box. Dr. Diadi wants to know the limitations of OCT.
Yeah, I didn't concentrate on that.
Yes.
Limitations of OCT will be one is, I think, media opacity when there is presence of cataract, and the imaging will be more difficult. Patients who are having a very poor fixation, that is, they're not able to see properly, so you won't be able to like fixate at a particular point. Um,
What about the area that you scan? What is the limitation in terms of the area scanned?
Usually
Some
it
of
is
the
seen
scan
as a.
dimension.
Sorry, ma'am.
In terms of the extent that you can scan with the OCT, what is the extent of the retina that you can scan laterally?
Yeah, so the usually we see is a 3 into 3 mm cube scan, or it could be a 6 into 6 mm area. And but later on, these newer OCTs, they have a wider range of imaging also.
Dhanashree, you want to ask something more on that?
Yeah, so a good presentation, Sneha. I would just like to point out the limitations, because when you advise OCT, you should also know in which case OCT may not be possible. So, as you mentioned, media opacities is the main problem. So, if you have very dense cataract or vitreous hemorrhage, you cannot do OCT,
Mm.
and the area which can be scanned is also limited. So if you have some lesion which is say beyond the arcades at the equator or at the periphery, obviously you cannot do this conventional OCT. So that is this thing. Also the lesions which are very highly elevated or very highly depressed, so in that situation also it is difficult to see the entire extent of the lesion. And you may even if you are able to see the top of the lesion, you may not be able to see the surface of the retinal surface or the
Yes.
bottom of the lesion. So it
Yes,
becomes
ma'am.
difficult to scan the entire lesion. So in the
Yes.
SPOCT, with SSOCT, probably this can be overcome to some extent, but still better than OCT, but still there are limitations with SSOCT as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Pallavi wants to know how to differentiate posterior scleritis from a choroidal lesion.
Ma'am, clinical examination, ma'am.
Okay. Pallavi, basically, what kind of choroidal inflammation are you looking for? Posterior
Posterior
scleritis.
scleritis.
Yeah. Posterior scleritis, usually you get the impression that there is something pushing from the back. You can see something like a dome pushing from the back. You may not see anything in the choroid. The choroid itself may not be so thickened, it will be more likely compressed. Whereas in a choroidal lesion, you may see something like a granuloma or a localized hyporeflectivity in the choroid. So that's usually how you would differentiate the two. Anything else you want to
Thank
add?
you, ma'am.
I think that slide she showed of the scan showing the zones in which you need to look at. I think that is very important to go in a systematic fashion. Sneha, can you go to that
Yes.
screen? Yeah.
You can see, no, ma'am. Do you have to? You can see the screen.
No, no.
I have to share it again, I think.
Yes, you have to share it. because the order in which that thing has to go is very important. If you do it as a routine, like a checklist, then things become much easier and you're less likely to miss. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I'd like all of you to follow this as a routine. Start from the top, going right down to the bottom. It may look silly, but sometimes you find the wrong OCT being uploaded in your EMR file. So if you go to number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, forgetting what is 1, very often there are errors. And you may find that things are a little different. So make it a habit to go in order from the top of the screen to the bottom. Make sure the right and left is correctly labeled, that your signal strength is good. And if you follow this, chances are that you will very rarely make a mistake in interpretation. Make it a habit to go in this format, and especially when you're doing the change analysis. Can you go to the next slide?
It is full screen, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Now, if you look at this registration failed, and you look at the numbers here, you see the foveal, the numbers here and the numbers here, they are both different. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, they are both different. So the fact that these numbers are different indicates that the point of scanning was different in both for whatever reason. Either the patient developed a cataract, patient developed a macular hole, or patient developed some loss in vision, they were not able to fixate properly. So if you have a good scan, then you should have a scan where if you look at the left side, the left scan, you see the fovea is 260, 265. That is the exact point at which the fovea is located, which scan it is located, and you see the next visit, it's exactly the same. So you know that this is a good quality scan where you can accurately compare the two visits. So these are small things that you need to follow when you're doing your evaluation. And also, if you look at the second scan, you see the scan quality on the right side. You see that the first image scan quality is very good, the second image is poor. And this is probably because the patient has either developed a posterior capsular opacification or a cataract. So that's why registration failed, scan quality is also poor. So these are things you need to know, and if you follow from top to bottom, you'll be very easily able to pick it up. So this is, I think, a very important slide that I'd like all of you to look at. Take a print screen if you can, and remember this. Anyone has any other questions? If there's nothing else, then we'll thank Sneha for a very nice and very crisp presentation.
Thank you,
And
ma'am.
we look forward to good reporting from everyone after this.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sneha.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye, everyone.